Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade. The decade where things are only getting worse before they get better. And in today's video we are going through exactly why everything you love needs to be gate-kept, otherwise it is all going to be burned down and destroyed, and all you will have left to enjoy is the ashes and your own nostalgia. Because as you can probably tell from the title, Soyjaks do come in to any sort of institution or any sort of group, ruin everything, and then think they've done a good job. And in today's example, it is the Welcome Collection. Welcome Collection acts as founders' racist, sexist, and ableist display. Exhibit of some of the 1 million books, objects, and paintings gathered by Henry Wellcome is very much a product of its time. Which, believe it or not, is exactly why we have museums. I went to the Royal Armouries last week. They have a whole load of stuff that are a product of their times, including Captain Cyborn's huge Waterloo diorama of 1838. It is absolutely huge, and this is just a picture I took of one particular section of his diorama of Waterloo. But as we can see, it is a product of its time, and you could argue that this is incredibly militaristic, and therefore has no place in our modern world where we have absolutely no militaristic tendencies whatsoever, or at least that's what the progressives say. So the entire reason we have museums, which is to have a window into the past, and to see what products of ye olden times, or products from abroad, were like, according to the progressives, we can't have that anymore, especially if they are Englishmen who collected said things. So the Welcome Collection has been accused of cultural vandalism, in other words, once again making the first strike in a battle in the culture war, after shutting an exhibition about its founder because it said it was perpetuating the wrong view of history, which is a term I absolutely hate. The Medical Museum, which attracts 550,000 visitors a year, has scrapped its display dedicated to Sir Henry Wellcome, the US-born pharmaceutical tycoon, because of its alleged racism and sexism. Wellcome founded Britain's biggest charity. Its £36 billion in assets are used for medical research, with achievements including the first drugs for leukemia and HIV. Unfortunately, he committed the sin of being born in the 19th century. It doesn't matter if your legacy led to the curing of epidemics and even cancer nowadays. No, he said the N-word a few times. We've got to get rid of everything he's ever done. Just having a quick look through the highlight images of the Medicine Man collection, there's actually some pretty interesting things here. For example, there are vanitas, or works of art intended to remind us of the transience of life and the certainty of death. And this model is based upon Queen Elizabeth I, and as you can see on the right hand side, it's her during life with, you know, flesh, hands, eyes and all that. And on the left hand side, it's skulls, bones and insects eating her decaying flesh. And also there is a collection of some of Charles Darwin's old walking sticks with interesting design patterns on. I particularly like the skull on the top there. But out of all these highlight images from the Medicine Man website that I've found, the only thing I can even remotely see as being racist is this Japanese papier-mâché model which is showing acupuncture points. But I don't see how this is racist. This was made by Japanese people to look Japanese. It's hardly like anyone's being particularly racist here. But looking for logic from the leftist perspective is pointless in and of itself, so we may as well see what they actually said. So back to the article. The Welcome Collection said of the exhibition, which opened in 2007, the world has changed in innumerable ways, and now is the right time to close this display, which is very much a product of its time. The Medicine Man display has been a permanent fixture since the Welcome Collection was opened on Euston Road in London. It shows some of the 1 million books, objects and paintings gathered by Wellcome, an avid collector who was born in a frontier log cabin in Wisconsin in 1853. Which is amazing. This should be a success story, literally coming from the very bottom of society, just a randomer in a frontier log cabin somewhere in the middle of nowhere America, and managing to be so successful that he then has a huge collection, a huge private collection of different medical instruments and books and art and all this other stuff that he then donated and made a collection for everyone to go see. A perfect example of what people should be doing with their success. Many are curiosities based on the history of medicine, healthcare and anatomy. Wellcome collected amputation saws, Peruvian mummies, an 18th century metal-plated artificial nose, and a 4,000-year-old human skull with a hole in it. The objects are eclectic. Napoleon's toothbrush, strands of George III's hair, the death mask of Benjamin Disraeli, Florence Nightingale's moccasins, and a guillotine from the French Revolution. Which I'm not going to lie, that all sounds pretty cool. This sounds like the type of place that I would actually love to visit and see all these things, but unfortunately, given that the museum appears to be being run by Soyjaks, they decided to announce that they are no longer allowing the public to see these things via Twitter. And as a museum, you'd think that they wouldn't have to ask this question, but they do, so this is how they start off the thread. What's the point of museums? Truthfully, we're asking ourselves the same question. As you can tell, I'm already going to want to shoot myself by going through this thread. When our founder, Henry Wellcome, started collecting in the 19th century, the aim then was to acquire a vast number of objects that would enable a better understanding of the art and science of healing through the ages. Sounds pretty interesting and a good use of money to me. Let's understand what came before us and also understand how other people are overcoming ailments. We might have something to learn from both the past and from other cultures. This was problematic for a number of reasons. Oh no, oh god no. Who did these objects belong to? Well, typically in a museum they'll tell you. In fact, around the Leeds Armoury, it did tell you. How were they acquired? If it's a private collection, typically they are bought and sold for. However, sometimes they are taken by force, that is true. Or sometimes it's a finders-keepers arrangement, which when it comes to the British Museum's collections, thank God they did find and keep them, because they probably wouldn't exist these days if they didn't. And finally, what gave us the right to tell their stories? Well, it's not like the stories are always going to be right, you are correct. And in fact, in the example in which they show here, I don't know if you'll be able to read it on the video, but it says this: Yoruba and Songhai figures. These 4 figures were from Central and West Africa and were acquired in the early 20th century, and Henry Wellcome's museum staff described them as representing diseases. At the time, European collectors did not always record how an object functioned for its creators. Within Yoruba society in Nigeria, the female statue with a swollen throat was used in communicating with ancestors who watched over their lands and crops. So essentially they were prayer aids and not actually representing ailments. So yeah, they had it wrong in the first place, but then, as museums do, they explore more, dig more into foreign or historical texts, and then get a better idea of what these things were actually used for. So what exactly gave you the right to tell that story next to these statues, Wellcome Collection? Of course, it is because you are very progressive and denigrating the very founder of the place where you work now, where we actually do have the opportunity to further explore into what these statues were. He gave you the opportunity to do that, and you are kicking him in the dirt for it. The result was a collection that told a global story of health and medicine in which disabled people, black people, indigenous people, and people of colour were exoticised, marginalised, and exploited, or even missed out altogether. Well, for a start, of course they're going to be exoticised. They are exotic. You know, medicine was done differently in the UK, Europe, and America compared to the rest of the world. So it is exotic to those people, as European and American medicine will be exotic to the people of Africa and elsewhere. And I do love how it says indigenous people, as if these European collections that Henry Wellcome collected as well didn't come from indigenous people. But in terms of marginalised and exploited, I'm going to need so much more information on what it means by that. Because assuming he bought everything in this collection, which he didn't necessarily do, but assuming he did do that, I don't understand how that's marginalising or exploiting. And this picture of the artificial limbs, I don't understand how that's helping you make your point either. But isn't this the point in museums anyway? You are exoticising the foreign, whether that be your own past, or whether that be what other countries did. I mean, at the Royal Armouries, for example, I found out in World War II that the Japanese really didn't like the idea of semi-automatic and fully automatic guns. And they only started making prototypes later in the war, and so every soldier was given bolt-action rifles and swords, as it was seen as a more honourable way to fight. Now, that is an exotic way to fight when you are used to the submachine guns and the machine guns of the American side. Does that mean that we should no longer be allowed to have that exhibit at the Royal Armouries? The answer is, of course, no, so there's no reason to close this one down either. Sorry, it's a bit of a mammoth thread this, but I am going to have to get through it all. We can't change our past, but we can work towards a future where we give voice to the narratives and lived experiences of those who have been silenced, erased, and ignored. And my lord, I am reading this out for you. Mummified male body. Son, grandson, brother, lover? Probably, you hope. Someone's. Old enough to want it, to dream, to flesh, to stir. He wore earrings, his tooth ached, someone's hands wrapped beads at ankle and wrist. This is horrible. Adorned him where he was going, touched him for the last time. He was coming here, tumbling across 1,000 years in an ocean. He arrived with a friend who might have been picked up along the way. They didn't say. But after a while she wandered off, and he, who had never liked parties, never known how to stand, or what to do when someone says, "Anyway, just going to get another drink," lay down in this corner. He misses his mother. He is missing. Sarah Moss, novelist and academic. It's this type of awful slam poetry type nonsense that appears to have taken over the exhibition recently. This isn't the only example of it, and I'm going to quickly go through some other ones while we go through this thread, because it's come up now. There's no way that I can not talk about it when it's on topic. So here's another piece of slam poetry, fragments of Jeremy Bentham's skin. We are not in the presence of Jeremy Bentham, who died in 1832. At best, it's a memorial to Bentham, and at worst, why display a memorial made from human skin? Marx described him as a leather-tongued oracle who could only have been manufactured in England. Bentham died while contesting the immediate emancipation of enslaved people. This is the worst writing I've ever seen in my life, by the way. The way that sentence is written, it sounds like Bentham was against the emancipation of slaves. He wasn't. He was a utilitarian and for emancipating enslaved people. But this is so badly written, you wouldn't know that. In fact, you'd think the opposite. Written on the skin is a reference to him bequeathing his body for dissection. The 84-year-old's fantasy was that every man might be his own statue, and the 1832 Anatomy Act ushered in a new scientific era of race science. All the Anatomy Act did was make grave robbing illegal, by the way, so I don't know what he's talking about. It literally just made it so that doctors and people studying anatomy could dissect donated bodies, but they couldn't have been grave robbed. That's all he did, so I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Decenter Bentham. Decenter Henry Wellcome's Bentham. What are you talking about? After emancipation, how could supremacy be justified? Through culture, museums recreated the white cis male body. I don't know what to tell you. I have no idea how to react to this. I am actually stunned into silence. Written on the skin is whiteness. Brought at Stevens auction rooms in 1925. Yes, he'd be okay with that. He's okay with... if he's okay with statues being brought and sold, then his body, or in this case his skin, being part of a museum, he is fine with it being brought and sold. What do you mean written on the skin is whiteness, you absolute buffoon? Time's up. Just rewriting labels isn't enough. Let's face up to all the human remains that Henry Wellcome collected. Dismantle Wellcome's enduring colonialism, its white infrastructure. Dan Hicks, author of The Brutish Museums. Why is it that people who absolutely hate museums are being hired or being asked to write this nonsense? Because at first that just started out as a bit of misinformation, a bit confusing, and it just turned into pure bonkery. So I think one of my favourite parts is that this was a picture from Twitter from someone called Sam Bowman saying that a friend took this picture at the Wellcome collection and is in such disbelief that he has to make sure people know it's real. So Dan Hicks, being the absolute big-brained soy boy that he is, decided to reply saying, in quotes, "taken by a friend," as if he didn't believe it. And then he says, taken by a friend, okay, so that implies that, oh, you didn't take this, you stole it from my tweet here, which is a completely different picture, as you can tell from not only the angle, but also the lighting. They are two completely different pictures, but Dan Hicks somehow thinks he got him. I don't understand, but what's even better is that this then takes you to Dan Hicks's thread, and he's got even more slam poetry that I'm going to make you suffer through. Dismantling Wellcome. Of all the people on display in this gallery, Henry Solomon Wellcome stands out. His body isn't here, but his name is everywhere. What is it about this one man that makes him so different from everyone else? Well, he was the person with this unique collection. That's what makes him different. Oh no, the answer in part is power. Oh, this is going to be good. During his lifetime, Wellcome harnessed the power of science to build a pharmaceutical empire. No, what he was a very good entrepreneur and managed to either make scientific discoveries in the pharmaceutical field, or what is much more likely is that he hired people to make these pharmaceutical discoveries, and then he marketed it to many people to cure their ailments, and that's how he made billions of dollars. So harnessing the power of science, like, you make it out like it's a bad thing. It is very annoying that power's a dirty word. Power's just a fact of life, but this is trying to say he was a bad man for harnessing the powers of science. His advances in medical research and technology, along with the immense wealth he put behind them, in turn powered the British Empire. So when I said dollars before, I probably should have said pounds. Which, by the way, this is a good thing. This is unironically a good thing. He made a pharmaceutical empire that helped power the British Empire. Do you know how it powered the British Empire? It kept people alive. Like science, museums have also been used as a tool of empire. Museums are magical places. They turn power into wonder, and through the language that they use and the ideas they choose to highlight and ignore, they turn some people into things. The message of this gallery is clear. You would not be standing here looking at all these wondrous things if it were not for Henry Wellcome, who bought and paid for them to be here. Yes, that is just entirely correct. It is his private collection that he has allowed, and even in his death, donated to allow people to see these, as you yourself call them, wonders. Wellcome died in 1936. He is survived by his money. Wow, this writing. He is survived by his money and his museum. That is awful English. Both of which serve to extend his power beyond his life. Oh my god. When they say they are using power to mean about 10 different things here, they are meaning power to mean discoveries. They are using power to mean entrepreneurship or running a business like a sensible person. And now they are using power to mean influence or even memory. Whoever wrote this really needs to go back to school because this is horrendous. The real thing that sets Henry Wellcome apart in this gallery and beyond is how this museum chooses to treat and remember him. How different would this place look if, rather than building a shrine to one man, we shifted our focus to remember all of the other people here? Subhadra Das, historian and writer. I do not believe you're a writer. Your English is horrendous. It's actually because of all these brain-dead slam poems that have been placed around the Wellcome collection, which Dan Hicks has been advertising over his Twitter feed. People pointed out that a lot of these were just chatting nonsense. And so, yesterday evening, Dan Hicks tweeted this out. Good evening to everyone except the increasingly shrill right-wing culture warriors desperately trying to intimidate, explore Wellcome out of making changes to a temporary exhibit every once in a while. It's not that they're making changes to it, it's that they're axing it. That is the issue. I mean, the Royal Armouries, as I went to the other day, their exhibitions have changed from last time I went. And I mentioned to one of the curators that I'd like to see more modern weapons here because, you know, that stuff's interesting to me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoy all the swords, the weapons from the age of the samurais in Japan and all this, but I would also like some more modern weapons because you just seem to get to World War II and then stop. And I know you have these weapons. I see Jonathan Ferguson bring them out every once in a while. And no, I did not manage to meet him, but the man I talked to did know him, so we had a bit of a conversation about how he's a celebrity now. Anyway, I digress. If the Royal Armouries was closing down or shutting down the entire Oriental exhibit because it's racist, I'd have massive issues. If they were just changing the way displays looked or took some exhibitions out to replace it with other ones, that would be fine. You obviously don't have room for everything, and that's okay. But the fact it's being axed, and it's being axed because it, quote-unquote, is racist and sexist, yeah, I have a massive problem with that, because you're just, as he says, right-wing culture warriors. Yeah, well, you're being a left-wing culture warrior, and it's destroying my culture, and I don't like that. Colleagues at the Wellcome are offering some of the vision and leadership we need in the UK arts and culture sectors. The idea that a museum must never change with the times is perhaps the most ludicrous and yet pernicious argument we're seeing in the right's ongoing war on culture. Yeah, no one's saying that though, are they, Dan? What we are saying is that museums should not be pushing a political agenda, either in the labelling of things, or, as what is happening at the Wellcome collection now, taking out entire exhibits because of their political outlook. You are no worse than ISIS destroying statues in place of worship throughout Syria, and you are no better than the Nazis who went on their book-burning campaigns. Museums are there to educate us about how things were in the past or how things are in other cultures or other parts of the world. They are not there to make value judgments on these things, but that is exactly what you want to do. And I know this is exactly what you want to do because I've read your Guardian articles. Dan Hicks wrote this article for the Guardian about a year ago, which I do believe we covered. Decolonising museums isn't part of a culture war, it's about keeping them relevant. Let's be open to the idea of returning stolen cultural objects and remaking international relationships with honesty. Total naivety. Most of these objects would probably have been destroyed by now if it wasn't for the British Empire keeping and storing and preserving them, and then allowing people from all over the world to come to these museums for free. You know, you can make voluntary donations if you really want to, and see these lovely pieces of culture from all around the world. Anyway, thought I'd just go off on a bit of a tangent there to make the point that the people who are involved with this collection are absolute Soyjak freaks and need to honestly be kicked out of these positions as soon as possible. They are not there to preserve anything, they are only there to preserve their own ideology and destroy anything that gets in the way of that. Anyway, carrying on with that large Twitter thread, we've tried to do this with some of the pieces in Medicine Man using artist interventions. That is the worst decision I've ever seen a museum make. But the display still perpetuates a version of medical history that is based on racist, sexist, and ableist theories and language, despite the fact you are doing your best to make sure that anything that is even remotely not on brand for the progressives is kicked in the face. And lucky for you, dear audience, I have already read this slam poetry, so there's no need to read any more. This is why this Sunday, on the 27th of November, we will be closing Medicine Man for good. I mean, to hand it to them, they are actually trying to be consistent here. They are saying, we cannot stop this racist, sexist, whateverist vision within this museum, so we're just going to close it down. We don't like it, so we're not going to let you see it either. If you want a vision of the future, it is the Soyjak telling you why you are a terrible person while they have a jackboot on and stamp on everything you love. Gate, keep the stuff you love. To those who have never visited, Medicine Man is a display made up of objects amassed by Henry Wellcome. The individual items within it show all the extraordinary ways in which people, through time and across cultures, have sought to understand the workings of the mind and the body to protect themselves and care for one another. Wow, that's so... I do not understand how any of this is sexist or racist. What are you talking about? Literally, it's a display that almost puts everything on equal footing. There's even a display of a air puffer, I guess you'll call it, that's supposed to put tobacco smoke up people's rectums if they drown, because they believe that the only reason people drowned was because they got so cold and wet inside themselves, which is technically true, but the problem is that it's in the lungs. So shoving tobacco smoke up the arse isn't exactly going to help that. But that is displayed as everything else is in that museum from what I can tell. It's just telling people what is on display. It's not making a value judgment about it, and nothing else has a value judgment attached to it. But by exhibiting these items together, the very fact that they've ended up in one place, the story we told was that of a man with enormous wealth, power and privilege, which was all entirely earned, by the way. The way he got this enormous wealth was by saving an enormous amount of people from ailments, many of which were probably fatal without him. And the stories we neglected to tell were those that we have historically marginalised or excluded. Incredible. We can't perfectly push our agenda within this museum, so we are just axing it for all. No one's allowed to see it because we suck at our own job. I don't know what type of intervention we can hope for with this. I do want this exhibit saved because it sounds like somewhere I want to go, but I don't know what to do, apart from get the government involved. But the government's the most useless thing on the planet at the moment, so I think it's just got to go forever. Like, honestly, we might never see anything like that again because of these people. They finish off by saying we want to change that, we want to do better, and we invite you to help us get there. Tell us, what is the point of museums? Well, I've gone through it enough this video, and you've annoyed me so much that I'm not even going to mention it again. You are a bunch of 2-year-old narcissistic morons who don't know what to do with themselves, or with the absolute insane privilege that you have earned yourself by being curators of this museum. And what do you do with it? You squander it. Why do you squander it? Because you want to feel good about yourselves because you can't do it in your own lives. But in doing so, all it is doing is ruining other people's chances to be educated, to see these wonders from the past and from other cultures. No, you're not allowing people to see it, and it is horrific. So quickly just going back to the Times article, most of the rest of the article was just going through that exact Twitter thread I went through, and then a load of people saying how much of a stupid decision this is. But I really want to go through this last paragraph. Wellcome died in Britain in 1936, leaving in his will his collection and the fortune which established the Research Foundation. The organisation, which paid 2 investment employees more than £7 million each last year, now denounces its founder for having the privilege of a wealthy white man in the Victorian era. They denounce him for having earned wealth. That is what they denounce him for. The man mass-produced insulin and even produced vaccines for diphtheria. The man's company saved literally probably millions of lives, and yet we're going to denounce him basically for being white. I mean, really, who's the racist here? Was it Henry Wellcome for having a large collection of things that he brought over the years with his vast wealth? Or was it you for saying that absolutely no one can see this stuff because a white man once owned it? That is the question I think I will leave you with today. That's everything I've got for you. Clown World is literally making me want to commit self-forever sleep, but someone's got to fight the good fight, and you, audience, you're doing it with me. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.